Oh, I forgot my thing. It's book club time. You have to have book club attire. Otherwise, you're not allowed in the club. Alright, book club attire. Book club attire. There we go. Ready to rock and roll. Where are we at? I don't like these stools. I'm going to have to lower this thing. Hello, book club. It is I, Dr. E. Eric. I don't have a good nickname. Hello, book club. It is I, Dr. Eric, your dissector of books. I really need to work on that. That's not a very good one. Hello, book club. Welcome to my review of Karen Chance's first, I think it was her first book, but of the Cassie Palmer series, or Cassandra Palmer, Touched by the Dark. Now, I was pushed into reading this one by a friend, much like the Kate Daniels series, and I am less enthused with the results so far. But before I get into the details, it's probably important to point out that I realize that some of the most recent videos have had very low energy. So I drank a lot of coffee before this one because I know you deserve a little bit more oomph in these reviews. I've just been run ragged lately. I'm so tired most of the time. Like I said, I was pushed into reading these by a friend who says that this series gets better. And it is my sincere hope that it does because I am committed to finishing it. Or as finishing it as it can be, because I think another book just came out. But for the first installment, Touched by the Dark, I was not all that... I read it once. And then I decided, nope, not for me. Years went by. I think I read it in 2018, maybe, or it and maybe part of the second book, which I am now in the middle of rereading. But I reread it again very recently. Same results for the first book. I am noticing the second book is a little bit better. But being pushed and pushed and pushed by my friend that it does get better. I've been promised that this does get better. Okay, I'll keep reading and we'll see. And I'll review them as I go. We'll see if this series does get better. But for now, it is difficult to get through at times. That's not to say there aren't good elements to this series, and that there isn't potential. I could see how it could get better. But for now, there's too much sex. It's distracting. It's not in any way helping the story, but for maybe one element of the story that I'm hoping at some point takes care of itself. The first category in the 5 Ps that we go over here is plot. And the story, I give it a 5 out of 10. I think it has room to grow. It's just readable. It's actually interesting. I think the other elements are pulling it down. It's an interesting setup. It's not much of a spoiler to go over that because all this is exposition dump right at the beginning. So you've got your main character, Cassie Palmer, 20-something, clairvoyant, ghost whisperer, and she's been running from the mafia. Not just any mafia, a vampire-run mafia that she had betrayed at some point in the last, I think it was about 3 years prior to this book starting. Now, I say betrayed, but in reality, you can look at it different ways. It could be that she was betrayed. They used her gifts to profit. She thought they were using her gifts to help people. The way she portrayed it is she really has no way to deal with it on the supernatural side of the house, dealing with the vampires themselves. She's got no clout, no power, but there's a lot of regular, mundane businesses that are rolled into this vampire mafia, so she betrayed those to the feds. To be honest, that sounds like a much more interesting story, and maybe one of these days, or maybe she has already written it, I just don't know much about Karen Chance and about the book she's written so far. I've just read this one and part of the second one. But that sounds like a really, really interesting story that we just skip right over and start where we're at right now in this book. So where are we at right now? Well, it seems that she's been on the run for about 3 years and she's been found. So now she's got to get out of Dodge. That's where the book starts. So it's not a spoiler to get into that. I'm not much of a spoiler. It's more of a setup. I'm trying not to get into spoilers on these videos. We may put some spoiler content, some in-depth sort of stuff on the local side of things behind a paywall so it's safe and everybody will know it's, hey, this is spoiler stuff, heavy spoiler stuff, but not so much here. So that's the setup. It leads into a lot of other things. You think this is going to be like a running story, and it kind of is, but there's so many more complications that get thrown into the mix immediately that it's actually a little hard to kind of piece everything together as you go. Not that hard. It was doable, but it's a little chaotic, we'll say. Moving on to people. I gave this one a 4 out of 10. The characters, they're interesting in and of themselves, but I haven't seen a lot of character development. Not in the first book, not in the... We're starting to see a little bit in the beginning parts of the second book. So maybe this is one of those categories that will get better as they go dramatically. Maybe not. I have yet to see. They seem interesting caricatures of characters as opposed to characters. I'm not a big fan of the main character, Cassandra Palmer. You see almost the entire story from her perspective. I'll get into that more when I talk about prose. But I'm not invested in her. I mean, there's a part of me that kind of wants her to get away, to get free. She's irreverent, and I do like that. I like my irreverent characters. I like my rogues. It's difficult to see the world through her eyes, especially through her brain. And maybe that's why I'm scoring her less than I should. And I didn't see any real character development in this book. And I haven't seen it yet in the second book either. She's the main character. That's sort of where you kind of need that sort of thing. The only character I'm seeing any potential for character development so far, and this is in the second book, is a war mage named Pritkin. He's very interesting. He's a total a-hole so far, and I like him for that reason, maybe. He strikes me as an interesting guy with an interesting background. Certainly a flawed individual. Definitely a flawed individual. Then you've got Thomas, who I thought was cool at first, and I just lost interest in him entirely. You've got Billy the Ghost, who's kind of one-dimensional, or no-dimensional. He's a ghost. But he is, again, he's kind of a caricature of a character, but it's one of those characters you can get away with that. I mean, he's dead. How much character development you gonna have? You, of course, have the main bad guy, Tony. He's not in it a lot, but he's the mafia boss, the vampire mafia boss. You have Louis, I want to say. Why am I forgetting his name suddenly? Louis. Louis has an interesting background, and I found him to be one of the more enjoyable characters to read. And then you have Mircea, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Mircea. 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 I don't pronounce names well at all. You have another vampire of a name that's sort of similar to that. Plays a big role. Bigger role towards the end. I won't get into too many details because it's spoilery, but these characters, they seem like they have interesting backgrounds, but I'm not seeing a lot of movement. That might have something to do with the fact that this is a very fast-paced book. There's really not a lot of time for that. When you have a real fast-paced plot, you're going to suffer somewhat on character development, obviously. I think that's it's a give and take. Right on into pacing, I gave it a 6. It is a fast plot. The plot itself and what's going on is interesting enough to keep your attention. I think this is the highest score I gave it. Was a 6 out of 10, this first book. There's enough interesting things going on, and it keeps you engaged when it doesn't lose you through other weaknesses. The actions are kind of chained together really well, and it doesn't even really lose you when it jumps through time. A lot of times when you jump through time in your perception of what's going on, and okay, now we're going to go 10 years back, or we're going to go 100 years back. A lot of times it's difficult to keep the pacing. This is actually a strength more so than many other series. It keeps the pacing fairly quick throughout, and it's done well. The jumping through time is done well. For prose, I gave it a 3 out of 10. This is the lowest scoring category. It's not like the prose in and of itself is horrible, and it's not like the prose in it itself is great. It's neither of those things. But you do see the story through Cassie's eyes pretty much entirely the whole time. And in her mind, it is a chaotic and confusing place. by design, I'm sure. But it can be difficult, I think, it's difficult for me at least, to see a story and to see a world and to deal with that. I think if you have a character like that is your main character, that maybe it's a better idea to look at the world through other people's perspectives more often, to give you more of a balanced approach. Coining the phrase monotone perspective, I think that's what this suffers from. This prose suffers from a monotone perspective in the mind of a 20-something female that I am so much removed from that world and those trains of thought that it's difficult for me, a 40-something-year-old man, to really get invested in the world through her eyes. So here's where I'm going to get a little controversial, perhaps because of the type of book this is. I'm reading it from a science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy perspective, not a romance perspective. If you're into what I playfully call bodice rippers, romance books where it's all about that sort of sexual action, I think you'll like this series more than I did. That's not really my thing. I've read very few romances. Most of the romances that I've read are mainly other things, and they slip into the romance area a little bit, such as the Kate Daniels series, which I really did enjoy. The Saracen Blade, an older book that I'm a huge fan of. That is the best prose I've ever read. But for this book, it's just too much sex. And I say too much. Let me be analytical in that. This is not just an opinion, I think. It detracts from the story. It detracts from the storytelling. It interrupts the pacing. It is just overwhelming. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy that sort of stuff as part of a story, usually. But you can go overboard with it, and I believe this book did. By overboard, I obviously mean it detracted from the story. That's overboard. If it serves the story, great. If you've got a lot of sex involved in the prose, in the book, and it serves the story, fine. But this just, it derailed things. Every time she started thinking about how hot this guy was or that guy was, it just, and the descriptions went on and on and on, and it changed the pace immediately. It just detracted from the story. Now, there was a need for some of that in the story, definitely, but not that much, not to that level. However, if that's why you're coming to the series, or part of the reason why you're coming to the series, I think you'll enjoy it just fine, because it's done well. I mean, you know, it's done well in that it's not poorly written, bodice ripping sort of stuff, but it is just like throwing in bodice ripping scenes into such depth and detail and length that it's just, it's too much. And again, this is from a female perspective. I am a male reader. That's not the problem. You know, I have read other authors that I just had to put down that were male authors that were describing, you know, romance sort of stuff, just too much, detracting from the stories. I've had to put, I'm not going to name specific names. I might review them later if I can ever bring myself to rereading any of it. But I had to put down entire authors because I just could not. It's just too much. Females were just way too one-dimensional. They were objects, basically, in the story, and I could not get past it. Again, let me clarify, this is a different author. These are different stories. My point is just that it doesn't matter if it's from a female's perspective, all hot and bothered about guys, or a male perspective, all hot and bothered about girls. If it doesn't serve the story, if it detracts from the story, it's not done well. And that's what I believe was the case for this story. Now, so far in the second book, there hasn't been a lot of opportunities, but I have noticed that it's done better. I'm hoping that this is one of the areas that gets better. Alright, for the fifth P, which is place, the world that this is all taking place in, that's been built, it's interesting. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 10, which is just shy of 5, which 5 is my readable, not readable. And the only reason for that really is just that it's not well fleshed out in its fantastical elements. Now, and we jump around in it a little bit too much. And I think that's a byproduct of, again, having a very fast-paced story. This plot moves really quickly, and the travel times and distance and all of that. Now, there's some shortcuts taken, some deus ex machina that comes into play when it comes to moving around in places, physical space and time. That's just part of the story. You know, it does take place in the real world that has a lot of fantastical elements built into it, and they have not been fleshed out very, very well yet, except for maybe a casino in Vegas and the magic building. But even then, I couldn't describe the building for magic very well. I mean, I could give you a few elements here and there. Again, it's just not really well fleshed out. It's not the focus, necessarily. It is the place that the story takes place in. Building a world doesn't seem to be the focus. It's this crazy, chaotic time, and what's going on with these characters. That's the focus. So, you know, cut it some slack. The world has potential. I think it will be fleshed out later on, and I think this score actually will go up. Of all of them, this score will likely go up. And they tend to. First book to last book in a series, they do tend to go up most of the time, because your world is going to get fleshed out as you go, and it's going to become more and more layered and more interesting. So my overall review is a 4. 4 out of 10. This is the lowest rating I've given anything ever before, but I am going to continue on. I've been told it gets better. I do believe it gets better. I trust this person who's telling me it gets better. A lot of other people, I'm sure, are going to tell me it gets better, or they're just going to be mad at me for scoring it so low. But I've got to be as honest as I can be. You know, I came away from this not wanting to read it anymore, so it can't get a 5 or better. I stopped reading it entirely, actually. And then, after a lot of urging, I went back and started reading it again, with the promise that it does get better. Like I said, I think there's too much sex involved in the story. I think it detracts from the actual story, but if you're coming here with a bodice ripper mentality and that's what you want, you'll probably enjoy it a lot more than I did. Do I think this series has potential? I do. I do think it has potential, and I've been promised that that potential will be realized, so I am going to continue on. Like I said, I don't know, a couple chapters, 3, 4 chapters into the second book, and I'm already seeing improvement. That improvement could be temporary, but I've been told it's long-term. I'm going to go with that. Okay. I'm going to tell you who that other author was. Harry Turtledove. I could not read Harry Turtledove. I read the first book, and I don't remember even the name of the book, but it was set in a world where I thought, well, okay, women are treated like chattel in this world, and they're sexual items, and that's all they really are. It's a part of the world building. Okay. And then I read a second book, or I started to, and I got maybe a third of the way into it, and it was an entirely different world, and the female characters were just bad. They were still bad. They were one-dimensional, and it wasn't good. So I stepped away from that. Maybe I'll review some Harry Turtledove stuff later. Maybe you'll be mad at me for saying that, but I could not read them. I tried. I gave it my best. So if you think I'm dead wrong about any of these ratings, please put a comment down below. If you want to urge me to keep going in this series and reviewing these and take this journey with me and see how my perceptions change as we go, perhaps, or maybe they stay the same, maybe they get worse, I don't know. Go ahead and comment down below and tell me what you think I'm in for. Please don't give me any spoilers, obviously, but, you know, just in general, does it get better? Does it get worse? What particular elements get better without giving away things? And as always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and Rumble and join us on Twitter or Facebook or wherever we happen to be. We're on MeWe, we're on Minds, we're all over the place. There's links at the end and in the description. Bye, y'all.